Good evening, gentlemen. I'm today going to discuss with you two very important hotspots in the world. The first being Ukraine and the second being the Middle East. Now we're going to have to look at these 2 points, these hotspots in totality. And as I told you, I'm not going to give you any news. I don't believe in that. I'm going to analyze the news. I'm going to give my assessment as a military historian as to what's happening. First, let's have a look at the Ukraine war. Now, it's been continuing for donkey's weeks, a long time, and the fact remains that Kherson, one of the important bones of contention between Ukraine and Russia, still is the center of a conflict. That means months have elapsed and Kherson has not been subdued by the Russians. In other words, they have been unable to capture it totally. Of course, Ukraine has suffered tremendously during this period. There's no doubt about it. Their economy is in shambles and they are dependent on doles from the Western world, in particular America, to fight on. I think their morale is a little low. But that all doesn't mean anything because the Russians have not won a decisive victory. See, when you say decisive victory, it means conquest, removal of the regime. Such a thing has not happened. And if you look at the map of Ukraine, you will see that the Russians are where they were, as it were, many months back. They've taken certain areas adjacent to the Russian state and occupied it. But at the same time, Ukrainian resistance has been stiff. And this is primarily because of the weapons which have been supplied to Ukraine by America. Now, if you look at the war in totality, I don't think the Russians have won, and neither have the Ukrainians lost. So it's a stalemate, but in favor of Russia. Because in the last press conference with Vladimir Putin he sounded very, very confident. He was confident because the Western world, particularly the United States and some of the European countries, have realized that this is a futile war. I mean, that is a fact. See, we all know that war is an extension of the political aim. And if the political aim is not achieved, it becomes an infructuous war. The United States and NATO had gone into this war to support Ukraine with the idea to defeat Russia, to bring Russia to its knees and perpetuate the hegemony of the Anglo-Saxons, particularly the Americans and the British, for the next 100 years. It hasn't happened. Now that is a point to be noted. That means the political aim has not succeeded. They haven't been able to win. And that result is the shoe has started to pinch. It's pinching on the Americans and it's having a very dangerous repercussion. And what are the repercussions they're having? American dollar is losing its hegemony over the world. Because people all over the world are realizing that we can't keep on relying on the Americans for everything, and let's have an alternative currency. That's how so many countries like India, China, Saudi Arabia are thinking of having trade with each other than the dollar as the standard currency. So most that goes through, you can well imagine this is going to be a very serious blow to American economy. And the Western world, of course, as far as Western Europe is concerned, they are in dire straits. They got so many other problems which they have got. The migrants, the minorities creating mayhem there and so many things. And their economy in doldrums. Germany is gone into a negative growth rate. England, as you know, is very badly off. The French are also tied up. And many of them want to give up the war in Ukraine and let the Russians have their way. It's the Americans which are holding on, and to an extent the British. And Biden has finally realized that he cannot win the war. So Russia has shown that it's very resilient. Its economy is very strong, and the Russians have been able to achieve a lot, in this short time. In the sense, the achievement is that they survived the American sanctions. survived being taken out of the global economic system, survived that they were not part of the SWIFT. There's so many things which they done because Russia, the Americans failed to realize, is a self-made economy. It has the largest reserves of oil and gas in the world, and they can always sell that at whatever price, at discounted price, and still continue fighting the war. They have their allies, and the biggest ally they have is Communist China and North Korea, Iran. And the Ukrainians, I think President Zelensky is now really a worried man because in case the tap stops, the Americans stop the tap of weapons to Ukraine, the Ukrainian army will collapse, and that would give the free run to the Russian army to move in. Perhaps if the Russian army had been more motivated, they would have easily turned the tables on Ukraine, but they did not do it. So there is a morale problem in the Russian army. That as a soldier I can tell you, because there have been some reports of some desertions, and the recent prisoner exchange which has taken place between Russia and Ukraine showed that the Ukrainians had taken hundreds of Russians as prisoners. Even the Russians had taken prisoners, so it has been a mutual exchange. And what is happening is that the battle line has stabilized, and nobody seems to be gaining anything. So obviously, the breaking point is coming very soon, and it is going to be in favor of Russia. Because my personal reading as a theoretical military historian is that America cannot sustain this war much longer for the simple reason that it's got its hands in the Middle East also, and it's losing credibility all over the world by concentrating only on Ukraine. Billions of dollars of weapons have been given to Ukraine, and it's at the cost of the American taxpayer. America, which is the biggest economy in the world, is going to slide down. I think the Americans have not realized it, or if they have realized it, they are not ready to admit the fact. It's like, the blind mice trying to just move forward. So, gentlemen, Ukraine is on its last legs. I think the battle is now going to culminate, and in a few weeks' time, or maybe a month, the Americans will have to stop supplying weapons to Ukraine and look for a diplomatic solution, and that would be in the favor of the Russians. And this war need never have taken place if the Americans had agreed to the Russian demands much earlier. The demands were very simple. Stop ringing Russia with NATO, and don't make Ukraine a part of NATO, number one. Number two, the Russians wanted a settlement with the Americans, which the Americans didn't want. They wanted Russia as a subservient state. So, gentlemen, it's been a very, very dangerous time as far as the West is concerned. And the West has suffered, and some of the smaller countries like Hungary, etc., stopped supplying weapons to Ukraine. They were not interested. And I do not know what purpose served the Americans to take Finland and Sweden, etc., in the fold of NATO. NATO, as you know, is a paper tiger. It hasn't fought a war for the last 78 years. And if somebody has a feeling that they're going to win the next war, hands up or something like that, it's not going to be that simple. So, gentlemen, Vladimir Putin can blow the trumpet. I think he's blowing it. And he's got a very staunch supporter in Narendra Modi. India has a very happy relationship, although I use the word happy by in my way of thinking, basically because India has been an ally of Russia and Russia has been an ally of India for the last half a century. And America must be feeling very cut up because despite all the red carpet treatment to Modi, the Indian government has not sided with the Americans, either against Russia, and have told the Americans that they're going to fight the American war against China. So, gentlemen, there's so many things happening. As far as Ukraine is concerned, which I've already said is a stalemate, but in favor of Russia. And I think the clock is ticking for Zelensky. How long is he going to continue? How long the Americans going to keep on supplying weapons there? Because there's another danger that has cropped up, and that is the Middle East. Now, the Middle East, as talking as a historian, I'm not interested in what is right and wrong because there's such a lot of propaganda going on. But the fact remains that the Israelis are facing an existentialist crisis with a terrorist organization that is Hamas. Nobody can deny that Hamas is not a terrorist organization, basically funded by Iran. Like Iran is funding the Houthis. The Houthis are another group in Yemen, and they are creating mayhem in the Red Sea and the Arabian Sea as well. So the question arises, what does America do? Basically, the sympathies of the common citizen of the Middle East is in favor of Hamas and the Gaza Strip. They would like the Israelis to stop the bombardment of Gaza and look for a diplomatic solution. But then this is like putting the wool over the eyes. Hamas does not want a solution. If they were interested in a solution, they would not have made that surprise attack when they rained about 10,000 rockets on Israel. Probably it was the instigation of Iran. We don't know. I mean, nobody knows about it, but Iran has made its sympathies clear. And we have a very pragmatic leadership from Saudi Arabia and the UAE, which are powerhouses of the Middle East. And these two countries have really struck a very balanced approach to the entire problem. The Saudi Arabians know that in case Hamas wins, they will have to face Hamas later on, because Hamas is another facet of the ISI, which had created mayhem in the world when Baghdadi had occupied vast tracts of Iraq and Syria and set up a caliphate there. Gentlemen, the Israelis are also at fault in the sense that they are not looking also for a solution. They want that Hamas should be decimated. I don't know whether they're going to succeed or they won't succeed. That's not my vision, but the point is, militarily, the Israelis do have the ascendancy, and Hamas doesn't have anywhere to run. And two incidents now which have shaken the world is, one is the attack on Iran, where almost 100 people were killed near the tomb of the Iranian General Suleiman, and another is the killing of the number 2 man in the Hamas leadership in Lebanon. He was hiding there, or whatever it was, we don't know. But Israeli intelligence is keeping a track of these things, like they were keeping a track of all the men who were involved in the massacre of the Jews when Hitler was in power. And they brought some of them back all the way from Argentina, kidnapped them, brought them, like Adolf Eichmann, if you remember. That's a long time back. I also was not there at that time, but I read about it. He was captured from Argentina and brought back, put on trial and hanged. So Israelis have faced a lot of persecution in world history, and this culminated in almost 60 lakhs of them being sent to the next world, to the gas chamber by Adolf Hitler. I think that's a black mark on the Germans, basically, because the Germans countenanced the killing of an entire race. That's called genocide. The Turks are sitting on the fence, but in support of Hamas. Now, my opinion about the Turks is a little different. They think that they should come back to the old days when the Ottoman Empire ruled the entire Arab world. And I've been watching some Turkish dramas. I think right up to 1914 or 1915, even the holy cities of Makkah and Medina were under Turkish control. Turks ruled the Arabs, they ruled the Christians, Armenians, and they had ruled certain areas in Europe as well in earlier, which were of course taken away when the Greeks had their War of Liberation in the 19th century. So Turkey is aspiring for that old glory, but I'm afraid they're going to get it back because Turkey is now no longer what the Ottoman Empire was earlier when great men like Suleiman ruled from Istanbul. So, gentlemen, the point is that the war in the Middle East is continuing, and I do not see any end to that war. Unlike I have just said that the Ukraine war is reaching the apex, and probably we will have a solution in the sense that Ukraine will either have to give up or face further destruction, and the Americans are going to stop supplying weapons to them. It's a matter of time now, because America has got to look after what's happening in the Middle East. Now, in the Middle East, the Americans have bought bases all over, in Iraq, in other places, and the fact remains that many of their bases have been attacked by the people all over the world, particularly in the Middle East. And if America continues this fight, it's going to be a Gentlemen, the war is now at a crucial stage in the Gaza Strip. As I've already mentioned, the Israelis have not been able to steamroller the opposition there. They have won some victories, but then, as I told you, victory means complete occupation and a change of regime. This has not happened. I don't think it's going to happen. I don't know whether the Americans will allow it. But at the same time, we do not know what's going to happen in the future. So, gentlemen, the battle is on, and Israel is going through various techniques which they are following, like flooding the tunnels and all that. You have read about it. I don't have to discuss it. But the solution to this problem lies in detente, in an acceptance, firstly, of the state of Israel as a viable entity, and second is giving some self-respect to the Palestinians by having a Palestinian state. Now, I know this is easier said than done, because even the Arab states are not really interested in an independent state for the Gaza Arabs, because that means they'll have to part with some of their territory, which they're not going to do it. And Israel, of course, is facing its own moment of crisis, but I think it was apparent on the cards since 1948 that it was going to happen, because the state of Israel was created as an artificial creation, but now that it is created, I don't think you can wipe it out. Well, gentlemen, the war is on. As I told you, there are two major incidents which have also taken place. It shows that the Israelis have a one-track mind. I really don't know who's done the terrorist attack in Iran. It could be anybody, and it could be X, Y, or Z. We don't know. But we'll have to wait and see further what happens. But these two hotspots in the world, that is Ukraine, which is, of course, I think is getting doused, and the Middle East, which is now growing up more and more. We'll have to see if the Israelis can prevail in Gaza or no. So far, so good for them, but there's tremendous resistance from Hamas, and that has to be accepted. And the biggest thing is the changing face of geopolitics, because America is losing its influence in the Middle East, because the world has realized, rather even the Middle Eastern countries have realized, that perhaps America is not the best bet to keep peace, because the Americans can't stop the Houthis from attacking the ships in the Red Sea, and they can't stop Iran. Then what the hell are they capable of doing? You may have so many troops, aircraft carriers, or whatever it may be, but to use them against people who don't have the same weaponry is tantamount to a war crime. Gentlemen, I will close now and say goodbye to you all. If you like my channel, please share it with your friends. Come back for more. In the meanwhile, I will say goodbye and look after yourself.